U.S. Solidarity Economy Network at the U.S. Social Forum in Atlanta. She had a whole track of courses or workshops, how you could go in and learn about what all these different enterprises were doing that were co-ops or worker-owned, or there was a restaurant that did not have any prices on their menu, and they had discovered they got paid more for their meals than if they had prices. Very inventive workshops. And we set up I was luckily there and was part of the founding of the Solidarity Economy Network. And we have Emily here today with us to talk about that and how the Solidarity Economy Network, and now she is creating cooperatives and collectives in Western Massachusetts. So thank you, Emily, for coming out here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Great to see so many people. Really impressive. Yeah, well, that was great. I could just say what he said and be done with it. But let's see. I'll try to push the boundaries a little bit and talk about cooperatives as one very important piece of trying to build a solidarity economy. So let me tell you a little bit about what solidarity economy is. It's really about building another world, about building another economy that works and serves people and planet, as opposed to private profits and blind growth. So I'll say that it's talk about 3 dimensions of the solidarity economy, just so we're on the same page. Well, first of all, let me have a show of hands. How many people feel like you know pretty well what solidarity economy is? Okay, a couple people. How many of you feel like you know, you have a general idea? How many people feel like this is really, you don't know the term, or you really don't know what it is? Okay, great. So solidarity economy is a set of practices that align with values. So it's a values-based economic system. So the values will look slightly different in different parts of the world. In the United States, the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, we talk about 5 values. One is solidarity, so solidarity, mutualism, cooperation, etc. So solidarity. The second is participatory democracy. So that's not just electoral democracy, voting every once in a while, but it's democracy in your community, democracy in your workplace, democracy, democratizing all these spaces, control of resources. So democracy. The third one is sustainability, which is pretty straightforward. The fourth one is equity. So we talk about equity in all dimensions, race, class, gender, etc., etc. And so just to clarify the difference between equity and equality, equality would be giving everybody exactly the same thing, regardless of need, and equity is giving people what they need. Is that cool? Okay. So those are 4. The 5th one that we talk about is pluralism. And this means that solidarity economy is not a one-size-fits-all model, right? We recognize that different things will work in different places and at different times and different cultures. And it's not a line approach. We don't have a blueprint. We don't say this is the only way. Let's try, let's see, right, what works. As long as these practices are aligned with these values, we're open-minded about what's going to work. So, people have their opinions, and some people believe this, and some people are this socialist or that socialist or this anarchist, and some people aren't ists at all. And that's all fine. It's a very big tent. The commitment, the common commitment is a alignment with these values. And then the other thing that I will say is that solidarity economy is very clear about being post-capitalist. So, yeah. And I'm not trying to throw stones at people that believe that capitalism is reformable. I don't believe it. And this framework of solidarity economy, if you're operating in this framework, you don't believe it either. So I don't want to throw stones. I mean, that's a position, right, that it's reformable. I don't think it's going to get us, I don't think we'll survive capitalism, both in terms of environmentally and in terms of socially. I mean, if you look around the world, it's a scary place, right? I mean, really and truly, there is a march towards fascism, and it's aided and abetted by our economic system. And then we're in the midst of the sixth extinction, right, of wiping out huge species on Earth, right? And a lot of this is really driven by capitalism, because capitalism is a system. It's not about individual greed or evil human beings. I mean, there are some, no doubt, no doubt, right? But it's really driven by the system that forces competition, that's premised on profit maximization. And if you don't do that, you're going to get out-competed. So instead of trying to meet human needs and protect the planet, it's aimed at, the premise of it is, if you maximize profit and pursue your own interest, that's the greatest good for everybody, right? That's how we achieve the greatest good. That's capitalism, that's its argument, right? So the very end goal is not necessarily bad. I just disagree that that's the way to it, because it's assuming that we're just these acquisitive creatures, whereas we're much richer than that. We're much richer than just wanting to calculate how to get the biggest bang for the buck, right? We're also about solidarity and reciprocity and love and cooperation, and we wouldn't exist as a species if we didn't practice that stuff and cooperation.
Reach out.
Yeah, so, yeah. And increasingly, that phrase, nature red in tooth and claw, or it's a dog-eat-dog world, or survival of the fittest. So that fits really, really, really well with survival of the fittest. It fits really well with capitalism. It fits really well with, capitalism is a social construction, right? There's nothing natural about capitalism. It's relatively young. There were many other economic structures systems before capitalism. But capitalism really is grounded in this story about competition, nature red in tooth and claw, dog-eat-dog world, survival of the fittest. And now science has shown in all fields across, biology and evolution and archaeology and neurology, over and over and over and over again, it just shows how our world, yes, there's competition, but there's so much symbiosis, right? Like, for instance, we are, something like 97% bacteria, and that's probably the wrong figure. But anyway, some massive amount of us is bacteria, right? And we're only a small percentage human, right? Because we're this symbiosis of bacteria and human, right? And over and over and over and over and over again, you see that that's what life is about, right? There is both competition, but also lots of cooperation. And so we need an economic system and world that works on that premise, right? Yes, there's competition, but there's also so much symbiosis, so much cooperation that's really necessary. Okay, so I strayed a lot. So I was saying these three things that solidarity economy is. So one, it's a set of practices that aligns with these values. It's a framework that pulls these practices together so that we can articulate and see and envision and imagine and believe in another world, a world that centers people and planet instead of profit maximization. And the third thing that it is a global movement. So we have the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network in the United States. We're kind of a latecomer, right? So Solidarity Economy was far stronger in Latin America, very strong in Latin America, Europe. Canada was way ahead of us. So there's an international network called REPES, which makes sense in French and Spanish. But in English, it would be something like the Intercontinental Network for the Solidarity Economy. And so that network is comprised of continental networks that exist on all the continents with the exception of Antarctica. We're working on it. And on the continental level, those networks are comprised of solidarity economy networks as well as different sectors, like, say, fair trade or co-ops or this, that, or the other, right? So that gives you a sense, right? There's this global network that's building this movement. There are some countries that have ministries or departments of solidarity economy. There are countries that have entire national framework legislation that requires the government to support the solidarity economy. And then there are a number of cities that have policies in support of solidarity economy. The United Nations has a task force on the solidarity economy. The International Labor Organization runs a Solidarity Economy Academy every year. So it's just to give you a sense of what's out there and that it's a real, it's real. It has legs. It's global. And we are together trying to build another world, another economy very broadly defined. So beyond just a narrow focus of economics as it's defined, but rethinking who we are, because we really do have to transform how we think about our relationships, how we act towards each other, and lift up those higher angels of our nature, right? The side of us that is loving and cooperative and giving and caring and forgiving, right? Instead of that other side that also exists, it's competitive and self-interested and all that. So that's basically solidarity economy. So let me get concrete about what it is. For sure, co-ops are a big piece of it. All those kind of co-ops, worker co-ops, producer co-ops, supplier co-ops, and a form that is attracting increasing interest, which is a multi-stakeholder co-op. So for example, a food co-op, which is normally owned by the consumers, right, the shoppers who are members. A hybrid or a multi-stakeholder would be owned by the workers as well, right? So it's more democratic, it's fairer. So these are growing. So co-ops, but we also embrace lots of other things. So let me just get a sense of, we did some of this already, right? Credit unions, food co-ops, maybe, I don't think there was anybody here who is part of a worker co-op, right? Okay. But how many of you belong to a CSA, a consumer-supported agriculture? So solidarity economy certainly would embrace that. We're looking for sort of collective enterprises, right, that aren't just driven by the profit motive. How many people, let's see, are there any community land trusts? There aren't any community land trusts here now. Or is there? There's one. What is it?
Community land trust.
Oh, right. Other people involved in that?
Yes, Michael St. John and some
Cool.
people out here.
Great. And so let me just do a check. How many people know what a community land trust is? So a number that don't. Do you want to say quickly what it is?
Well, in our case, it was put into community land trust in 2013 by Joanna Becker. development over time in the normal sense, capitalistic sense.
So is it conservation? Is the land undeveloped?
We have 6 acres in agricultural easement, and then some of it we want to keep aside for just natural and forest reforestation of, from the logging days. But then also to have some affordable housing that we can use hopefully some natural type of housing builds.
Right. So community land trusts, as opposed to land trusts, which are often about conservation, community land trusts have some kind of social mission. So maybe promoting agriculture, small farmers, promoting permanently affordable housing, sometimes promoting employment. Yep.
Well, what we have is we have about an acre in development now, and very slowly, but we are donating everything to the Senior Center, Meals on Wheels, Food Bank, whatever we have, and we keep expanding and growing the soil. We've got a healthy soils grant out there.
Yeah.
That's
Perfect. Yeah. And so the way that it's used for creating permanently affordable housing is usually the land is held in trust by the community land trust, and so the land is not a factor in the price of the housing. And then somebody, say, can buy a house, and often the community land trust is able to leverage various sources of financing and grants to lower the cost of housing. So you get a good deal on your house, but it's limited equity. So Keith talked a little bit about limited equity. So just what that is, it means that when you go to sell your house, there's a cap on what you can sell it for. So that means if the real estate market has just gone insane, you can't just profit on it and leave behind a house that is no longer affordable. So limited equity maintains this permanent affordability. So community land trusts are great for creating permanently affordable housing. I'll just give you an example of a community land trust in Boston that was able to acquire through eminent domain. They won the right to eminent domain. They were able to actually buy or seize, take property, a number of blocks. And that neighborhood just looks completely different from any other neighborhood. So they did not displace people. The same residents were able to stay. The housing is beautiful. It's really beautiful housing, but it's affordable. They have beautiful playgrounds. They've got a greenhouse. They have a community garden right in the middle of the community. They have workforce development. So because they own the land, the community owned the land, they also have always had a seat at the economic development table. They always had a voice. So it really reflects what they prioritized. So that's the potential of a community land trust. Let's see. How many of you care for somebody else? Your children, your parents, your neighbor? Yeah, raise your hands. I mean, right? Everybody engages in some care work. So right there, you are part of the solidarity economy as we conceive of it, right? So we embrace the importance, the legitimacy of care work, right? It's a valuable economic activity. If you hired somebody to take care of your elders or your kids, you have to pay them a lot of money, right? So people that are doing that, even if it's non-waged, it's legitimate economic activity. So, and it's not done for profit. It's done out of exactly love and solidarity and caring and reciprocity and all that, right? So that's a piece of solidarity economy. How many people use any kind of public service? Library, park, roads. How many of you enjoy clean air, right? Some of the regulations, right? Safe food, et cetera, right? So where I'm going with this is there are publicly provided goods and services that, and this is somewhat debatable, right? So the anarchists would sort of object to this, but others of us would accept that the state is an important piece of the solidarity economy. In theory, the state is all about, governing for the common good. Now, of course, we know it's been hijacked by the 1% in corporations, but that's not what it should be, right? And it's we need to fight over that. We need to fight to take back control so that the state, the government, serves the people and not the 1%. But surely, when this other world, when this solidarity economy comes into being, surely some of these institutions, these public institutions, public schools, parks, are keepers, right? So the upshot of all of this is to say, if you look around you and you look at, and there are others, so DIY, do it yourself, right? Self-provisioning, community gardening, or your own gardening. Let's see, things like, in all sectors of the economy, right? There are examples of practices that are done that align with those values, that are not done to maximize profit, but that are done for the welfare of the community and the members of that enterprise, that practice. And so if you looked around, you could see that there is this huge foundation upon which to build, right? A lot of it is there. And whether you agree with solidarity economy and me, or not on the issue of capitalism, maybe, some of you believe that it can be reformed. Right now, things are just so bad. Really, we are poised on the edge of just disaster in so many ways. I'm all for working together, right? I believe that capitalism is not survivable, but I'm all for us working together to build a better world, to build more collectively, democratically owned and managed enterprises and practices. Things like social currencies, things like time banks. So there's lots of community loan funds. The entire, Wikipedia is a good example, right? That's not done for profit, right? People contribute because we like to share our knowledge, right? That's how we are as human beings. So it's all about building an economy and a world that really speaks to our higher nature, our better angels. So a couple other maybe specific examples. I've been hearing a lot about the cannabis economy being kind of in crisis. And so one thought, I said that I would mention this, in Massachusetts, there's a provision, we just legalized both medical and recreational marijuana in the state. And there's a provision there that for a cannabis farmers cooperative, and they, as I understand it, they were awarded a license, one of the licenses already. And so that provides the room for a number of cannabis farmers, growers, to get together and work under this one license, and they're a cooperator. They're a farmers cooperative. So, probably as individual growers, it's very hard to make it and compete against the big players. So one possibility is a farmers cooperative. That might be something that's useful. The housing, I think that we've talked a lot about the housing. I just wanted to offer the community land trust. In addition to cooperative housing is another idea. And I think the limited equity piece is really important, because otherwise you can have something that's democratic, but if what it means when you sell out your house, your property just is like unaffordable for anybody else, then you're not preserving that benefit for future folks. Let's see what else. I had a couple other things. In fact, I think there is a kind of a plan, a blueprint, a proposal that Jim was telling me about, that they actually got a fair way down the road. So it wasn't only a community land trust to develop housing, affordable housing, but also how to develop a construction co-op that would build the housing or rehab the buildings on the community land trust. And so you're creating a business that would support the construction of affordable housing, and then people are trained up so that they can run a construction cooperative. You could also leverage things like, to the extent that the community land trust needs landscaping or janitorial services, right? You could think about how can you make these links to create cooperatives that serve those niches. The last thing I guess I'll mention is, Keith mentioned a little bit about automation. I don't know if folks know this projection that by 2030, so in 10 years basically, 40% of our jobs are vulnerable to automation. 40%. Now that doesn't mean necessarily we're going to lose 40%, but even if it's a fraction of that number, that's like a real game changer. And I think that we have to start thinking about livelihoods and not just jobs. Surely, we will have to have some, be employed, earn some of the green stuff. But at the same time, to the extent that we as individuals, we as communities can start to provide for ourselves. And it doesn't have to be buying and selling. It could be growing your own food. It could be producing stuff for distribution in the community. The less dependency we would have on that day job. There are some interesting examples. Detroit is pretty far out in front because these communities are so devastated that they've been doing a lot of that community production already in terms of growing food and skill shares and tool shares, things like that. But now what they've added is cutting edge technology. So they have 3D printers, they're experimenting with 3D printing houses, and we're just manufacturing a lot of things on a local level that, in years past would have been inconceivable. So that's a really exciting idea. And at the same time, I actually am more optimistic about the universal basic income. I think it's a good idea. I think we should push for it. I think that there is a lot of support because even some of these leading lights of technology realize if we don't have something like that and we have that kind of job displacement, it's just going to be crazy. So it's self-interest, self-preservation, right? We'll have total social unrest with those kind of levels of unemployment. So being able to leverage this moment and push for things like universal basic income, I think is important, as well as just the struggle over control of technology. And if it's all hoarded by the corporations, we're pretty screwed. So there's a huge battle over how that technology is rolled out and shared and controlled and how it's accessible. And if it's something that we can gain community control over, the potential is huge and promising. So I think I'll end there. So I will say, just if people are interested in hearing more about worker co-ops, my day job is I'm the co-director of Wellspring Cooperative. We're developing a whole network of worker cooperatives in Springfield, which is your typical deindustrialized city in western Massachusetts. We have an upholstery co-op, a window restoration co-op, wooden window restoration, a quarter-acre hydroponic greenhouse, and then a little hula hoop cooperative. So that's been a really interesting experience as well. I'll stop there.
All right. Thank you to our two speakers. They brought us some different models for the future, and that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at building the economy for the common good in Mendocino County, we call it. And we've gone out for 2 years. We've had 2 classes, a class here on the coast and a course in Willits, going out finding institutions that were building themselves the future economy of Mendocino County that is happening right now. It's really been a very exciting process. And what we really want to do now, we want to have a community discussion about this, about what is our economy of the future going to look like here? How are we going to make it better? We can get these experts maybe to give us opinion on some of this, but we'd like to hear